There's a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. It's the tiredness that settles in after an argument you didn't want, about a topic that kept changing, that ended with you somehow being the one who was wrong. You walk away and you can't even reconstruct how you got there. You were calm, you were reasonable, you explained yourself carefully, and still, the ground shifted under you until you were standing somewhere you never agreed to stand. For years, that was my life, and I want to tell you about the day I finally understood what was really happening, because it changed everything. Entangled in chaos, understand the chaos, break the pattern. Let me set the scene. 3 adults lived in that house. Myself, my former partner, though we still shared the walls out of circumstance rather than affection, and our adult daughter, grown in age, but somehow still caught in the gravity of a childhood that had never quite finished with her. The house was small, cramped in a way that made privacy impossible and tension inescapable. You learn to read a house like that. You learn the sound of certain footsteps, the particular silence of the refrigerator hum when no one is speaking. The way a mug set down a little too hard on the counter can mean a storm is coming. The house always felt like it was holding its breath. And I told myself for a very long time that we simply had a communication problem, that we were 3 people who loved each other imperfectly and just needed to learn to talk. I believed that if I stayed patient enough, calm enough, logical enough, I could eventually untangle us. I want you to hold onto that word, untangle, because it assumes there's a knot that can come loose. It assumes the tangle is a mistake, an accident, something that got twisted by bad luck and could be gently worked free. What if the knot was never meant to be untangled? Let me show you how it usually began. It started with something small. It almost always did. An object left in the wrong place, a task forgotten, a minor irritation that on any ordinary day would barely register. Why didn't you put that back where it belongs? Simple enough, a fair question, I'd answer it. I'd say I forgot, or I'd put it back, or I'd offer to handle it. In a healthy exchange, that would be the end. But it wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Because within seconds, the topic had already moved. You always forget. Notice the shift. We went from a single event, one object, one moment, to a permanent character flaw. From something I did to something I am. I'd try to correct that, gently. I don't always forget. I forgot this one thing. And then it moved again. See, you don't even care enough to admit it. Now we're not talking about the object anymore. We're not even talking about forgetting. We're talking about my capacity to care, about my character, about the entire architecture of who I am as a person. And if I defended myself against that, there you go, now you're attacking me. Do you see it? Do you feel the vertigo? I'd started the conversation trying to answer a question about a misplaced item, and somehow I'd become an uncaring man who attacks the person I'm supposed to love. And I had no idea how I'd gotten there. This is the first pattern I want you to understand. It's called topic shifting, and it's one of the most disorienting experiences in a dysfunctional relationship. The complaint keeps moving. Every time you answer it, it becomes something else. And here's the crucial insight, the one that took me years to reach. When the topic keeps moving, the topic was never the point. The misplaced object wasn't the issue, it was a doorway, a pretext, a spark thrown into a room that was already soaked in something flammable. But I didn't know that yet, so I did what reasonable people do. I tried to solve it. And this is where it gets painful, because my logic, the very thing I was proudest of, the calm, reasonable voice I brought to every fight, my logic was making everything worse. Let me explain why. When you're in a normal disagreement, logic helps. You clarify, you find the misunderstanding, you reach an agreement. Logic is a tool for reaching truth together. But that only works if both people are actually trying to reach truth. In these arguments, the other person wasn't trying to reach truth. And I don't say that to villainize her, this is important, so stay with me, she wasn't consciously plotting anything. She was doing something far more human and far more tragic. She was trying to discharge something, to move a weight of old, unprocessed pain out of her body and into the room. And every logical, reasonable, carefully worded response I offered became new material to twist. Say I stayed perfectly calm. You're being cold, you don't even care enough to get upset. Say I got upset, see, you're out of control, this is who you really are. Say I agreed with her, so you admit it, I was right all along about everything. Say I disagreed, you never listen, you always have to be right. There was no move on the board that didn't lose. It was like arguing with smoke. You reach out to grab it, to pin it down, to make it hold still long enough to deal with, and your hand closes on nothing, and the shape has already drifted somewhere else. And here's the trap, the one so many good, reasonable people fall into. The more reasonable you try to be, the more ammunition you provide. Because the fight was never a search for a solution. It was a machine, and my responses were the fuel. Now let me tell you about my daughter, because a system like this rarely stays between two people. She was grown, an adult, but somewhere inside, developmentally, she was still standing in the wreckage of an earlier version of this same house. And she had learned, the way children do, that the safest place in a storm is to pick a side. So she'd enter the conflict. Sometimes she'd side with her mother, and suddenly it was 2 against 1. Sometimes she'd turn on both of us, unloading her own accumulated grievances into the fire. And sometimes, this was the strangest one, she'd storm off dramatically, slam a door, and somehow that would raise the emotional temperature of the whole house even higher, as if her absence was its own kind of accusation. This is what psychologists call triangulation. Instead of one clean conflict between two people, you get shifting alliances, emotional pylons, a rotating cast of who's angry at whom. And the insight here is quietly devastating. In a dysfunctional system, conflict spreads. Nobody stays neutral for long. The argument wasn't between two people. It was the operating system of the entire house. It was the thing the house ran on. And then came the moment that changed everything. We were mid-argument. I honestly couldn't tell you what it had started about, because by then it had mutated 4 or 5 times, and I was doing my usual thing, trying to find the reasonable center, trying to name what we could actually fix. And she looked at me and said, almost casually, "This is exactly why things will never change." And I froze, because in that one sentence, something came into focus that I had been staring at for years without seeing. This is why things will never change. I had been treating every argument as an attempt to change something, to solve a problem, to reach a better place. That's what I thought we were doing badly. But that sentence revealed the truth. The argument wasn't failing to create change. The argument existed to prove change was impossible. That was its actual function. That was its job. To take every small friction and inflate it into evidence that nothing could ever be different, that we were permanently stuck, that hope itself was naive. And in that instant, I understood something I'll never forget. The conversation was just the spark. The dynamite was buried somewhere else. Everything made sense now. Why the tiny complaints exploded, why logic never worked, why I always lost. The misplaced object was never $100 of damage. It was the fuse on something that had been packed into the walls of that house years before I ever misplaced anything. She wasn't fighting me about the object. She was fighting something old, something that had nothing to do with me, something she had never been able to name or grieve or set down. And in the absence of a way to process it, the pain had to go somewhere. So it attached itself to whatever was nearest, a forgotten task, a mug in the wrong spot, me. And here is the part I need you to really understand, because it's the difference between staying trapped and stepping free. She wanted the loop. On some level, she needed the loop. Not because she was cruel, but because the loop was familiar. The loop was a way of keeping the old pain in motion without ever having to face it directly. As long as we were spinning, she never had to stand still in front of the real thing. So what do you do with that? For years, I thought the answer was to argue better, to be more patient, more articulate, more fair, to finally find the magic combination of words that would make her see reason. I was wrong, there was no such combination, and chasing it was keeping me imprisoned. Because here's the mechanical truth of a loop. It requires two people, it requires the back and forth. My explanations, my defenses, my reasonable clarifications, they were the rhythm the whole thing danced to. Without my participation, the machine had nothing to run on. So one day, in the middle of another argument spiraling out from something I can't even remember, I did something different. I said nothing. She made the familiar opening move, the complaint, the pivot to my character, the invitation to defend myself, to step into the ring, to begin the dance we'd done 10,000 times. And I just didn't. I didn't yell, I didn't storm off, I didn't deliver some cold, cutting speech. Those would all have been moves in the game, those would all have been fuel. I simply declined to play. She pushed harder, the daughter drifted in, sensing the storm, waiting to take her position. The pressure in the house rose, waiting for me to do my part, to say the line that would restart the machine. And instead, quietly, I said the only true thing I had left. There's no right answer. Because there wasn't, I finally understood that there wasn't. This wasn't a question with a solution I'd been too foolish to find. It was a game specifically designed so that no answer could ever be right. Naming that out loud, there's no right answer, was the first move I'd made in years that wasn't fuel. It was the sound of me stepping out of the circle. Now I want to be honest with you, because this channel is about truth and not fantasy. The house was not magically healed. My former partner did not have a tearful revelation. Our daughter did not suddenly find peace. Systems that have run for decades don't dissolve because one person changes one response. But something shifted, and that something was me. I stopped seeing the arguments as puzzles I kept failing to solve, and started seeing them as weather patterns moving through the house that I could observe without stepping into. I stopped taking responsibility for emotions that were never mine to carry. I stopped believing that my job was to decode, absorb, and answer for everyone else's unprocessed pain. Let me give you something you can actually use, because recognition without tools is just a nicer prison. First, learn to notice the topic shift in real time. The moment a conversation moves from a specific event to you always, or you never, or you don't even care, a flag should go up. That's the signal that you've left the world of solvable problems and entered the loop. Second, understand that you are not responsible for regulating another adult's emotions. You can care about someone's pain without accepting the job of being the thing they discharge it onto. Those are different things. Compassion is not the same as being a lightning rod. Third, recognize that in a genuine loop, the goal is not to win. There is no winning. The only healthy move is to stop feeding it. That can look like calm disengagement. It can look like naming the pattern out loud. It can look like a simple, quiet sentence, "I don't think this is really about the dishes," and then not getting pulled into the argument about whether it's about the dishes. And finally, the hardest one, accept that stepping out of the circle will feel like losing. The other person may escalate. They may accuse you of not caring, of walking away, of refusing to engage. That escalation is not evidence you did the wrong thing. It's evidence the machine has lost its fuel and is revving to get you back. Your calm is not cruelty. Your refusal to fight an unwinnable fight is not abandonment. It is the beginning of your freedom. Here's what I've come to understand, sitting on the other side of all those years. You cannot solve a circular argument with logic. I know that's a hard thing to hear, especially for those of us who built our whole identity around being the reasonable one. We want to believe that reason can reach anyone, that the right words exist for every situation. But some arguments aren't a search for truth. They're a container for pain that has nowhere else to go. And you cannot reason someone out of a fight whose entire purpose is to avoid the real thing underneath it. You can't fix a problem when the problem isn't the problem. You can only step out of the circle. And the strangest thing, the thing I still think about, is that stepping out wasn't an act of anger. It wasn't revenge or victory or even a boundary in the harsh sense we usually mean. It was closer to grief. The grief of finally accepting that the conversation I'd been trying to have for years was never available to me, that the resolution I kept reaching for didn't exist, that the exit from the maze wasn't a door I'd failed to find. The exit was realizing I could stop running. If you've lived inside a loop like this, I hope tonight you sleep a little easier knowing it was never your failure to find the right words. There were no right words. There was only a circle, and the circle was never yours to solve. It was only ever yours to leave. If this reached something in you, subscribe and stay with us, because understanding the chaos is the first step to breaking the pattern.